Before I begin today's peculiar tale of mystery and courage, let me take a moment to speak of the man behind the stories, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Born in 1859 in Edinburgh, Doyle wasn't just a brilliant writer. He was also a trained physician, a curious thinker, and a passionate believer in justice. Though he studied medicine, it was through the ink of his pen that he truly healed minds, by giving the world a detective unlike any other. Sherlock Holmes, the brilliant yet emotionally distant sleuth, wasn't born out of fiction alone. Doyle was inspired by one of his own professors, Dr. Joseph Bell, who taught him to observe the smallest detail and reason from it. Through Holmes, Doyle blended logic and imagination, cold deduction and warm storytelling. And though Holmes often takes the spotlight, it is through my eyes, Dr. John Watson, that his stories breathe life. If you're someone who enjoys timeless mysteries and unforgettable characters, make sure to subscribe to our channel. There are many more adventures waiting for you, with shadows, secrets, and Sherlock Holmes at the heart of them all. Today's case is one such example. It does not feature grand conspiracies or political crimes, but rather a single woman on a bicycle, riding alone through the countryside, followed by something or someone far more sinister than she imagined. And so begins the adventure of the Solitary Cyclist. Between 1894 and 1901, Mr. Sherlock Holmes remained constantly engaged. During those 8 years, there wasn't a single complex public case in which he wasn't consulted. Additionally, he dealt with hundreds of private cases, some of the most intricate and unusual in character, where he played a vital role. This long stretch of tireless work yielded many dramatic successes, though not without the occasional failure. Since I kept extensive notes on all these matters and was personally involved in many of them, selecting which ones to share with the public has always been a challenge. Still, I've held to my usual method, choosing those cases whose intrigue lies more in the cleverness of the solution than the horror of the crime. And so, I present the curious case of Miss Violet Smith, known as the Solitary Cyclist of Charlington, and the strange conclusion to our investigation, which ended in an unexpected tragedy. While this case may not fully showcase Holmes's famous skills, certain elements make it stand out among the long chronicles of crime from which I draw these narratives. Upon checking my notebook from 1895, I found that it was on Saturday, April 23rd, when we first heard of Miss Violet Smith. Her visit, as I recall, was quite unwelcome to Holmes at the time. He was deeply absorbed in a complex problem involving the bizarre harassment of John Vincent Hardin, the well-known tobacco millionaire. Holmes, who valued focused thought above all else, disliked anything that broke his concentration. Yet, despite his desire to avoid distractions, it was impossible to turn away a young and graceful woman who arrived late that evening at Baker Street, seeking his advice and help with great urgency. Tall, elegant, and regal in appearance, she refused to leave without telling her story, and it became clear that only force could have driven her away before she finished. Resigned, with a faintly tired smile, Holmes invited her to sit down and explain what was troubling her.
"At least it cannot be your health,"
said Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning her intently.
"Someone who cycles with such energy must be in excellent shape."
She looked down at her feet in surprise, and I noticed the slight roughness along the side of her shoe sole, clearly caused by repeated contact with a bicycle pedal. She admitted that she cycled quite often, and that this was, in fact, connected to her reason for visiting us. Holmes then took her unloved hand and examined it with the detached attention of a scientist analyzing a specimen.
"You'll forgive me, I hope. This is my profession,"
he said, releasing her hand.
"I nearly assumed you were a typist. But of course, it's music. See the spatulate fingertips, Watson? That's common to both. But there's a certain spirituality in her face."
He gently turned her toward the light.
"That you wouldn't find at a typewriter. This lady is a musician."
The young woman confirmed that she taught music.
"In the countryside, I presume, judging by your complexion."
She replied that she lived near Farnham, on the Surrey border.
A beautiful area, full of historical interest. Remember, Watson, that's where we arrested Archie Stamford, the forger. Now, Miss Violet, what has happened to you near Farnham, on the Surrey border?
With remarkable clarity and composure, she shared her story. Her father, James Smith, once led the orchestra at the old Imperial Theatre, but he had passed away. She and her mother were left with no family aside from one uncle, Ralph Smith, who had gone to Africa 25 years earlier and hadn't been heard from since. After her father's death, they fell into poverty. One day, they learned of an advertisement in the Times asking for their whereabouts. Naturally, they became hopeful, thinking someone had left them an inheritance. They promptly visited the lawyer mentioned in the notice and met two men, Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Woodley, who had recently returned from South Africa. According to them, Ralph Smith, who had been a friend of theirs, had died months earlier in severe poverty in Johannesburg. On his deathbed, he asked them to find his relatives and ensure they didn't suffer hardship. Though it seemed odd that her uncle, who had never contacted them in life, would express such concern after death, Mr. Carruthers explained that Ralph had only just learned about his brother's death, which caused him to feel responsible for their well-being.
Excuse me, when exactly was this interview?
She replied that it had taken place last December, nearly 4 months ago.
Pray proceed.
Miss Smith then described her strong dislike for Mr. Woodley, who, she felt, was an extremely unpleasant man, with his bloated face, red mustache, and hair slicked flat against his forehead. He constantly leered at her. She found him utterly revolting and couldn't imagine that Cyril, her fiancé, would ever associate with such a man. At this point, Holmes gently smiled.
Ah, Cyril is his name?
The young lady blushed and laughed, confirming it was Cyril Morton, an electrical engineer, and that they hoped to be married by the end of the summer. Then, slightly embarrassed, she noted how she had drifted off topic. Her real point was that while Mr. Woodley was repulsive, Mr. Carruthers, though older, came across as much more agreeable. He was a dark-skinned, clean-shaven, and reserved gentleman, but polite and with a pleasant smile. She explained that Mr. Carruthers inquired about their financial condition and, upon learning how poor they had become, offered her a job teaching music to his 10-year-old daughter. She initially hesitated, not wanting to leave her mother, but Carruthers suggested she could return home every weekend and even offered her a generous salary of £100 a year. Ultimately, she accepted the offer and moved to Chiltern Grange, about 6 miles from Farnham. Carruthers, she explained, was a widower who had hired an elderly and respectable housekeeper named Mrs. Dixon to manage the household. The child was sweet, the home environment was welcoming, and evenings with Mr. Carruthers, who shared her love for music, were genuinely enjoyable. As planned, she visited her mother in town every weekend. However, her sense of peace was soon shattered by the arrival of Mr. Woodley. Supposedly visiting for just a week, it felt more like 3 months. He bullied everyone around him and harassed her in particularly vile ways, bragging about his wealth and offering her lavish gifts, including diamonds, if she agreed to marry him. When she firmly rejected him, he assaulted her after dinner one evening, grabbing her in his strong arms and refusing to let go until she kissed him. Fortunately, Mr. Carruthers walked in just in time and physically removed him. In response, Woodley turned violent toward his host, punching him and cutting open his face. That disgraceful scene marked the end of his visit. The next day, Carruthers apologized deeply and assured her such behavior would never be repeated. She hadn't seen Mr. Woodley since. Then she reached the real reason for seeking Holmes's help. She explained how, every Saturday morning, she rode her bicycle to Farnham Station to catch the 12:22 train to town. The route from Chiltern Grange was extremely isolated, especially one long stretch that passed between Charlington Heath on one side and the woods surrounding Charlington Hall on the other. It was rare to see another soul along that lonely path. No carts, no peasants, until reaching the high road near Crooksbury Hill. 2 weeks ago, as she passed this area, She happened to glance over her shoulder and saw a man on a bicycle about 200 yards behind. He appeared middle-aged, had a short dark beard, and was gone by the time she reached Farnham, so she thought little of it. But when she saw the same man again in the same spot the following Monday, and again on the next Saturday and Monday, her concern began to grow. He never approached her directly, but always kept his distance. Still, it was undeniably strange. She mentioned the matter to Mr. Carruthers, who took it seriously and arranged for a horse and trap so she wouldn't have to travel those roads alone. However, it hadn't arrived in time, and that very morning, she had once again taken the route on her bicycle. Sure enough, there was the same man, dressed in a dark suit and cloth cap, his dark beard the only feature she could clearly make out from afar. Though not frightened, she was deeply curious and decided to find out who he was. She slowed her bike, and so did he. When she stopped completely, he stopped too. She then tried to trap him, rounding a sharp bend in the road at speed and stopping suddenly, hoping he would reveal himself. But no one came. She turned back and looked down the road, which stretched for a mile without a single soul in sight. Strangely, there were no side roads at that point either. No place for him to disappear. Holmes let out a soft chuckle and rubbed his hands together, clearly intrigued.
This case certainly presents some features of its own. How much time passed between the moment you turned the corner and when you realized the road was clear?
She told him it was about 2 or 3 minutes.
Then he could not have retreated down the road. And you're sure there are no side roads?
She confirmed that there were none.
Then he must have taken a footpath, either to the left or right.
She quickly ruled out the heath side, saying she would have seen him if he'd gone that way.
Then, by process of elimination, it's clear he went toward Charlington Hall. That stands on its own grounds to one side of the road, correct? Anything else?
She replied that there was nothing more, only that the entire situation had disturbed her so much she felt compelled to seek Holmes's advice. Holmes fell silent, lost in thought for a few moments, before he looked up again.
Where's your fiancé now?
She said that Cyril was working at the Midland Electrical Company in Coventry.
He wouldn't pay you a surprise visit, would he?
She replied with mild indignation, saying she would certainly recognize him if he had.
Any other admirers?
She admitted there had been a few before she met Cyril.
And since?
She mentioned Woodley, reluctantly, saying that if he could be called an admirer, he was the only one. Holmes noticed her hesitation.
There's someone else.
She seemed a bit flustered, but confessed that it might just be her imagination. Still, she sometimes felt that Mr. Carruthers showed an unusual amount of interest in her. Since they often spent time together, she played piano accompaniments for him in the evening. She couldn't help but notice the attention. He had never said anything inappropriate and behaved like a perfect gentleman. But, as she put it, a girl always knows. Holmes's expression grew more serious.
What does he do for a living?
She answered that he was a wealthy man.
No horses or carriages.
She admitted he didn't own any, but still appeared to be fairly well off. He traveled to the city 2 or 3 times a week and seemed deeply involved in South African gold shares. Holmes nodded thoughtfully.
Please keep me informed of any new developments, Miss Smith. I'm quite busy at the moment, but I'll make time to look into this case. Until then, don't take any action without letting me know first. Goodbye, and I hope we'll only hear good news from you.
After she had left, Holmes lit his pipe and stared into the middle distance.
It's only natural that a girl like her would have admirers, but preferably not shadowy men on bicycles following her along desolate roads. This is all the signs of a secret lover, but there are several strange and suggestive elements to this case, Watson.
That he appears only at that particular spot?
Exactly. Our first task is to find out who lives at Charlington Hall. Then there's the question of the connection between Carruthers and Woodley. Such different personalities, and yet they came together to find Ralph Smith's relatives. Why? One more thing. How can a household afford to pay a governess double the going rate, but doesn't own a horse, even though it's 6 miles from a station? Very odd, Watson, extremely odd.
Would he go down?
No, my dear fellow, you will go. This might be nothing more than a petty intrigue, and I can't abandon my current investigation for it. You'll leave early Monday morning for Farnham. Once there, conceal yourself near Charlington Heath. Observe everything carefully and trust your own judgment. Then, inquire about the occupants of Charlington Hall and report back to me. And now, Watson, not another word about this matter until we have a few solid stepping stones on which to build our solution."
We had learned from a young lady that she took the Monday train from Waterloo at 9:50. So I started early and caught the 9:13 instead. Upon arriving at Farnham Station, it wasn't difficult to get directions to Charlington Heath. The location of the incident was unmistakable. The road ran between an open heath on one side and an old yew hedge on the other, surrounding a park dotted with majestic trees. At the center stood a grand stone gateway, mottled with lichen. Each pillar was topped with worn heraldic emblems. Though this was clearly the main carriage drive, I also noticed several gaps in the hedge with paths leading through them. The house itself couldn't be seen from the road, but the entire setting gave off a sense of gloom and decay. The heath, however, was covered in brilliant golden patches of blooming gorse, glowing under the bright spring sunlight. I hid behind one of these clumps, positioning myself to observe both the gateway to the hall and a long stretch of the road in either direction. The road had been empty when I arrived, but soon I saw a cyclist coming from the opposite direction. He wore a dark suit and sported a black beard. When he reached the edge of Charlington grounds, he jumped off his bicycle and led it through a gap in the hedge, vanishing from sight. About 15 minutes later, another cyclist appeared. It was the young lady, coming from the station. As she approached the Charlington hedge, she looked around cautiously. At that very moment, the bearded man emerged from his hiding place, jumped on his bicycle, and began following her. In that wide open landscape, they were the only moving figures. The elegant young woman sitting tall on her bicycle, and the man behind her, hunched low over his handlebars, each movement filled with a suspicious air. She looked back at him and slowed her pace. He slowed down too. When she came to a full stop, he also stopped, keeping about 200 yards behind. Then, in a sudden burst of courage, she whipped her bicycle around and rode straight toward him. But he was just as quick and sped off in retreat. Eventually, she returned, head held high, completely ignoring the man who had trailed her. He had turned around as well and kept following her from a distance until they disappeared around a bend in the road. I stayed hidden in my spot, and it was wise that I did. A little while later, the man reappeared, now riding slowly back. He turned into the hall's gate and got off his bicycle. For a few minutes, I could see him standing among the trees, adjusting his necktie with raised hands. Then he mounted his bicycle again and rode off toward the hall. I quickly crossed the heath and peered through the trees. Far off, I caught a glimpse of an old gray building with sharp Tudor chimneys. But the driveway led through thick shrubbery, and I could see no more of the man. Still, I felt satisfied with what I had observed that morning and walked back to Farnham in good spirits. I visited the local house agent, but he knew nothing about Charlington Hall. He referred me to a prominent firm in Pall Mall, which I visited on my way home. There, I was received with polite professionalism. No, I couldn't rent Charlington Hall for the summer. I was just too late. It had been let about a month earlier to a Mr. Williamson, an elderly and respectable gentleman. That was all the agent could tell me. Client matters, he said, were confidential. That evening, I presented my report to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, expecting at least a small word of praise. But instead, his expression was even sterner than usual as he addressed my findings.
"Your hiding place, my dear Watson, was completely inadequate. You should have positioned yourself behind the hedge. You would have gotten a much closer look at this interesting fellow. As it is, you were hundreds of yards away and have told me even less than Miss Smith. She believes she doesn't know the man. I'm convinced she does. Why else would he be so desperate to keep her from getting close enough to see his face? You described him bending over his handlebars. That's more concealment. Honestly, you've done remarkably poorly. He returns to the house, and to find out who he is, you go to a London house agent?"
What should I have done? I asked, feeling somewhat frustrated.
"Gone to the nearest public house. That's where all local gossip gathers. They could have told you every name in the hall, from the owner to the kitchen maid. Williamson, the name means nothing to me. If he's an elderly man, he can't possibly be the cyclist sprinting away from that athletic young lady. So what have we gained? We know the girl's story is accurate, but I never doubted that. We know the cyclist is connected to the hall, but that too was obvious. We know the hall is rented by a man named Williamson. How does that help anyone? Well, don't look so discouraged. There's little more we can do until next Saturday. In the meantime, I may make a few inquiries myself.
The next morning, we received a letter from Miss Violet Smith. She gave a clear and concise account of the same incidents I had witnessed the day before. But the most important part of her message was in the postscript. She confided to Mr. Holmes that things had grown awkward at her place of employment because her employer had proposed to her. While she believed his feelings to be sincere and honorable, she made it clear that her promise was already given to someone else. He took the rejection seriously, yet graciously. Still, she admitted that the atmosphere had become tense.
Our young friend seems to be getting into deep waters,
Holmes remarked after finishing the letter.
This case is turning out to be far more interesting than I first assumed. I could use a quiet, peaceful day in the country. I think I'll go down this afternoon and test a few theories I've developed.
That peaceful day in the countryside ended quite unexpectedly. Holmes returned to Baker Street late that evening with a cut lip, a swollen bruise on his forehead, and an overall battered look that made him seem more like a criminal than a detective. He was clearly amused by the whole experience and laughed as he shared his story.
I hardly get any real physical activity, so this was a treat. You know I've trained in boxing. It's come in handy today. Without it, I'd have been in serious trouble.
I asked Holmes to tell me exactly what had happened.
I visited that country and I mentioned to you earlier and started asking around, quietly of course. The bartender turned out to be quite the talker. He told me that Williamson, white beard, lives alone in a large house with a small staff, is rumored to be a clergyman, though his behavior seems far from clerical. I checked with a clerical agency, and they confirmed that a man by that name once served in the church, but his past is clouded in scandal. The bartender also mentioned a certain red-mustached gentleman named Mr. Woodley, who frequently visited the house on weekends. He described them all as a rough crowd. Just as we were discussing this, who should walk in but Mr. Woodley himself? He'd overheard everything from the next room. Naturally, he confronted me, wanted to know who I was and what business I had asking questions. He cursed me out, threw in some nasty insults, and then tried to hit me. His punch only half landed. The next few minutes were delightful. It turned into a good old-fashioned boxing match. I walked away like this.
He gestured at his bruised face.
And he had to be taken home in a cart. That was the end of my country outing. Not very productive, I'll admit, but certainly entertaining.
Then came another letter from Miss Smith on Thursday. She shared that she had decided to leave Mr. Carruthers' employment. No amount of money could make her stay in such an uncomfortable situation. She planned to return to London on Saturday and had no intentions of going back. While her decision was partly due to the tension with Mr. Carruthers, the main reason was the reappearance of the dreadful Mr. Woodley. His appearance was even more disturbing now. He seemed injured, his face badly disfigured. Though she only saw him from a window, she was terrified. She mentioned that he and Mr. Carruthers had a long conversation, after which Carruthers appeared very agitated. It seemed Woodley was still nearby, even though he didn't sleep at the house. She caught sight of him again the next morning, creeping around the garden. The sight of him chilled her. She'd rather face a wild animal than see him again. She simply couldn't understand why Mr. Carruthers allowed such a vile man anywhere near. Still, she concluded with relief that all would be over by Saturday.
So I believe, Watson, so I believe,
said Holmes seriously.
There's some deeper plot surrounding that little woman, and it's our duty to make sure no one troubles her on that final journey. I think we should make time to head down together on Saturday morning and ensure this strange and complicated case doesn't end badly.
I must admit that, until now, I hadn't taken the case all that seriously. To me, it had seemed more strange and grotesque than actually dangerous. After all, It's not unusual for a man to lurk around and follow an attractive woman. And if the man in question lacked the courage even to speak to her, fleeing at her approach, then he hardly seemed like a serious threat. Woodley, the brute, was a different case altogether. But aside from one incident, he hadn't bothered our client either. Lately, he had been visiting Carruthers's house without even attempting to approach her. The man on the bicycle, I thought, was probably one of those weekend guests at the hall, the kind the publican had spoken of. But who he really was, or what he truly wanted, was still a complete mystery. What finally made me uneasy was the seriousness in Holmes's tone and the fact that he quietly slipped a revolver into his pocket before we left Baker Street. That one act alone made me realize there could be something tragic hidden behind this strange sequence of events. A rainy night had passed, giving way to a glorious morning. The countryside, blanketed in heath and sprinkled with blooming yellow gorse, looked especially lovely to eyes weary of London's grays and browns. Holmes and I walked side by side along a broad, sandy road, breathing in the fresh spring air and delighting in the songs of birds and the feel of renewal all around. From a rise in the road at the shoulder of Crooksbury Hill, we could see the grim hall standing out among ancient oak trees. Trees that, while very old, were still younger than the building they encircled. Holmes pointed down a long stretch of road that wound like a reddish-yellow ribbon between the brown heath and the fresh greenwoods. Off in the distance, just a tiny black dot, we spotted a vehicle heading our way. Holmes grew impatient.
I have given a margin of half an hour. If that is her trap, she must be making for the earlier train. I fear, Watson, that she will be past Charlington before we can possibly meet her.
Once we passed the rise, the vehicle disappeared from view. Still, we pushed onward at such speed that I, unaccustomed to the pace due to my mostly sedentary life, fell behind. Holmes, always in fine condition, seemed tireless. He moved with light, energetic steps, never slowing, until suddenly, when he was about 100 yards ahead, he stopped short and raised his hand in a gesture of grief and despair. At that same moment, an empty dog cart came racing around the bend. The horse was cantering, the reins dangling loosely, and the cart clattered toward us at high speed.
Too late, Watson, too late,
he said as I caught up to him, gasping.
Fool that I was not to allow for that earlier train. It's abduction, Watson, abduction. Maybe even murder. Heaven knows what. Block the road. Stop the horse. That's right. Now jump in, and let us see if I can repair the consequences of my own blunder.
We jumped into the dog cart. Holmes turned the horse sharply, then gave it a quick cut with the whip, and we sped back down the road. As we rounded the curve, the entire stretch between the hall and the heath came into full view. I reached out and grabbed Holmes's arm. I said, "That's the man." A solitary cyclist was approaching us with his head bowed and shoulders hunched, pouring every ounce of strength into his pedaling. He sped toward us like a racer. Suddenly, he lifted his bearded face, spotted us close by, and abruptly stopped, leaping off his bike. That coal-black beard stood in stark contrast to the paleness of his face, and his eyes glowed feverishly. He stared at us and at the dog cart. Then, a look of stunned recognition washed over him.
"Hello! Stop there!"
He shouted, using his bicycle to block the path.
"Where did you get that dog cart? Pull up, man!"
He yelled again, pulling a pistol from his pocket.
"Pull up, I say, or by George, I'll put a bullet into your horse."
Holmes tossed the reins into my lap and jumped down from the cart.
You're the man we want to see. Where's Miss Violet Smith?
"That's what I'm asking you. You're in her dog cart. You ought to know where she is."
We met the dog cart on the road. There was no one in it. We drove back to help the young lady.
"Good Lord, what shall I do? They've got her, Woodley, and that scoundrel parson. Come, man, come, if you really are her friend. Stand by me, and we'll save her, even if I have to leave my body in Charlington Wood."
He ran madly, pistol in hand, toward a gap in the hedge. Holmes followed, and I, after tying the horse by the roadside, followed behind. He pointed toward some tracks on a muddy path.
This is where they came through. Hello. Stop a minute. Who's this in the bush?
It was a young fellow, no older than 17, dressed like a stable hand, in leather cords and gaiters. He lay flat on his back, knees pulled up, with a nasty cut on his head. He was unconscious, but alive. A quick look told me the injury hadn't fractured the skull.
That's Peter the groom. He was driving her. The fiends dragged him down and beat him. Leave him. We can't help him now, but we might still save her from the worst fate a woman can face.
We sprinted wildly down the winding woodland path. As we reached the shrubbery surrounding the house, Holmes suddenly halted.
They didn't go into the house. Look, there are their tracks to the left, beside the laurel bushes. Ah, just as I thought.
At that moment, a woman's shrill scream, filled with terror and horror, pierced through the bushes. It ended on a high note with a strangled gurgle.
This way. They're in the bowling alley. Ah, the cowardly dogs. Follow me, gentlemen. Too late. By the living jingo.
We burst into a stunning green clearing surrounded by ancient trees. At the far end, beneath the shadow of a large oak, stood a strange trio. One was Violet Smith, clearly our client, looking faint and unsteady, with a handkerchief tied over her mouth. Opposite her stood a heavy-faced, red-mustached young brute, legs apart, one arm on his hip, the other twirling a riding crop. His whole stance screamed vulgar triumph. Between them, an elderly, gray-bearded man in a short surplice over a tweed suit was tucking away a prayer book and patting the aggressive groom on the back in cheerful congratulation. I gasped, "They're married."
Come on, gentlemen.
He rushed forward, Holmes and I chasing close behind. Violet leaned weakly against the tree for support. Williamson, the so-called priest, gave a mocking bow, while Woodley advanced, laughing with brutish glee.
You can take off the beard, Bob. I know who you are. Well, you and your friends showed up just in time for me to introduce you to Mrs. Woodley.
In response, Carruthers yanked off the false beard, revealing a long, pale, clean-shaven face. He lifted his revolver, pointing it at Woodley, who approached menacingly with the crop in hand.
Yes, I'm Bob Carruthers, and I'll see this woman is treated justly, even if I have to hang for it. I warned you what I'd do if you harmed her, and by the Lord, I'll keep my word.
You're too late. She's my wife.
No, she's your widow.
His revolver fired, and blood spurted from Woodley's waistcoat. The man screamed, spun, and dropped flat on his back, his red face turning a ghostly white. The old man burst into a vile stream of curses and pulled a revolver from his coat, but Holmes was quicker, aiming his weapon right at him.
Enough of this. Drop that pistol. Watson, pick it up and keep it on him. Thank you. Carruthers, give me yours too. We're done with violence. Hand it over.
Who are you then?
My name is Sherlock Holmes.
Good Lord.
I see you've heard of me. I'll stand in for the police until they arrive. You there, he called to a nervous stable boy who had crept up to the edge of the glade. Come here. Take this note to Farnham as fast as you can ride.
Holmes scribbled on a page from his notebook and handed it over.
Give this to the superintendent. Until then, you're all under my custody.
Holmes's commanding presence controlled the scene entirely. Williamson and Carruthers carried the injured Woodley into the house, while I supported the frightened young woman. I examined Woodley on Holmes's request and brought back my assessment to the old dining room, where Holmes sat with the two captives. I said, "He will live."
What? I'll go up and finish him now. You mean that Angel is tied to Roaring Jack Woodley for life?
You needn't worry. There are two solid reasons why she could never be his wife. First, Williamson had no legal authority to perform a marriage.
I'm ordained.
And unfrocked.
Once a clergyman, always a clergyman.
I don't think so. Where's the license?
We had one. I've got it right here in my pocket.
Then you got it through fraud. Regardless, forced marriage is no marriage. It's a serious crime, as you'll soon learn. You'll have years to ponder it, 10 or so, if I'm not mistaken. As for you, Carruthers, you'd have been better off keeping your pistol holstered.
Maybe so, Mr. Holmes. But when I thought of everything I did to protect her, for I loved her, truly loved her more than I've ever loved anyone. It drove me mad knowing she was in the hands of the worst brute in all of South Africa. From Kimberley to Johannesburg is names feared. Believe it or not, ever since she began working for me, I never let her pass this house alone. I always followed her on my bike, at a distance with a beard so she wouldn't know. She's noble and spirited. If she had known I was following her, she would have quit immediately.
Why didn't you tell her she was in danger?
Because she'd have left, and I couldn't face that. Even if she couldn't love me, it meant everything to see her grace the house, to hear her voice.
You call that love, Mr. Carruthers, but I would call it selfishness.
Maybe they go hand in hand. Either way, I couldn't let her go. And with that crowd nearby, someone had to keep her safe. When the cable came, I knew they'd make their move.
What cable?
Carruthers pulled a telegram from his pocket and handed it over.
This one.
The telegram was short and direct. The old man is dead. Holmes gave a thoughtful grunt.
I think I see how things worked, and I can understand how this message would, as you say, bring them to a head. But while we wait, you might as well tell me what you can.
At that, the old scoundrel in the surplice erupted in a torrent of foul language.
By heaven, if you squeal on us, Bob Carruthers, I'll deal with you just like you dealt with Jack Woodley. Go on and cry over the girl if you like. That's your own business. But if you sell out your pals to this plainclothes copper, it'll be the worst day's work you've ever done.
No need to get excited, Reverend.
Holmes replied, lighting a cigarette.
The case against you is already clear enough. All I want are a few details, purely out of curiosity. But if you have trouble speaking up, I'll do the talking, and you'll see just how little you're actually hiding. To begin with, the three of you came from South Africa to run this scheme. You, Williamson, you Carruthers, and Woodley.
Lie number one. I never met either of them before 2 months ago, and I've never set foot in Africa in my life. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Mr. Busybody Holmes.
What he says is true.
Well, 2 of you came over. His Reverence is a local product. You knew Ralph Smith in South Africa. You had reason to believe he wouldn't live long. You found out his niece would inherit his fortune. Isn't that so?
Carruthers nodded, while Williamson let out a string of curses.
She was his next of kin, and you knew the old man wouldn't leave a will.
Couldn't read or write.
So the 2 of you came to England and tracked down the girl. The plan was for one of you to marry her, and then split the inheritance. For some reason, Woodley was chosen as the husband. Why was that?
We played cards for her on the voyage. He won.
I see. So you hired her as a governess, and Woodley was supposed to win her over. But she saw right through him for the drunkard he was, and wanted nothing to do with him. Meanwhile, things got complicated when you fell in love with her yourself. You couldn't stand the idea of that ruffian owning her, could you?
No, by George, I couldn't.
You quarreled. He left in a rage and made his own plan.
There's not much left for us to explain, Williamson. Yes, we argued. He knocked me down. I got even with him for that. Then I lost track of him. That's when he teamed up with this outcast padre here. I later found out they had set up shop near the station, right along her usual route. I kept an eye on her, knowing something wicked was brewing. I spotted them a few times, trying to figure out their plan. Then 2 days ago, Woodley showed up at my house with that cable saying Ralph Smith was dead. He asked if I was sticking to the deal. I said no. He asked if I'd marry the girl myself and give him a cut. I told him I'd gladly do so, but she wouldn't marry me. He said, let's get her married first. She might see things differently after a week or 2. I told him I wanted no part in anything violent. He left, cursing like the foul-mouthed brute he was, swearing he'd have her no matter what. She was leaving me this weekend. I'd even arranged a trap to take her to the station. But I was uneasy, so I followed her by bicycle. She had a head start, and by the time I caught up, it was too late. The first sign I had was when I saw you 2 coming back in her dog cart.
Holmes stood up and flicked the end of his cigarette into the grate.
I've been very slow, Watson. When you said in your report that you saw the cyclist seemingly adjust his necktie in the shrubbery, that alone should have told me everything. Still, we can congratulate ourselves on a most curious and, in many ways, unique case. I see 3 members of the county police arriving down the drive, and I'm pleased to see the little stable boy managing to keep up with them. That means neither he nor the charming bridegroom will suffer permanent damage from today's events. Watson, in your medical capacity, would you check on Miss Smith? If she's well enough, we'd be honored to escort her home to her mother. And if she's not quite recovered, you might mention that we were about to telegraph a certain young electrician in the Midlands. That should do the trick.
He then turned to Carruthers.
As for you, Mr. Carruthers, I believe you've done what you could to make amends for your part in this dreadful affair. Here's my card, sir. If my testimony can help you at your trial, you are welcome to it.
In the whirlwind of our constant work, it has often been hard for me, as you may have noticed, dear reader, to wrap up my accounts and provide the final details the curious might expect. Each case has led straight into the next, and once the climax is over, the people involved often vanish from our lives. Still, in this instance, I find a short note at the end of my manuscript. I recorded that Miss Violet Smith did indeed inherit a large fortune, and she is now married to Cyril Morton, the senior partner at Morton and Kennedy, the well-known Westminster electricians. Williamson and Woodley were both tried for abduction and assault. Williamson received 7 years, and Woodley got 10. I have no record of Carruthers' fate, but I am certain the court didn't view his assault too severely. Given Woodley's notorious reputation as a dangerous thug, I believe just a few months in prison sufficed to meet the ends of justice. And thus ends another chapter in the extraordinary chronicles of Sherlock Holmes. A brave young woman, a shadowed path, and villains who mistook silence for weakness. But in the end, truth rode beside her, and justice followed close behind. Even the quietest wheels can carry the weight of courage, and the road to justice begins with a single, solitary step. If this tale stirred your curiosity, as it did mine, then I invite you to stay with us. Like the story, show your support with a like, share, and subscribe, because every click helps us bring more timeless mysteries to life. Until we meet again on the next adventure, this is Dr. John Watson, bidding you farewell for now.